Thanks, John, and thanks for not packing it in last year. So this is actually a brand new company. It's actually our first conference, so thanks everyone for coming out. As John mentioned, we set out with this company about a year ago and raised some money, did an IPO on it. And just a few months ago announced our first acquisition, copper project, VMS project in Saskatchewan, just northwest of Flin Flon. I'll get into the details of the project, but just something to highlight here on the first page, and John brought this up, a fresh look at historical districts, right? So as one of Canada's newest copper companies and base metal exploration companies, we're out there looking for the next high-grade deposit. Nowhere better to look than our backyard, and in particular, one of the most prolific VMS belts in the world around Flin Flon and Snow Lake. So let me get the clicker here. Only have 10 minutes, so we'll get right into it. So we started with a top-down approach. Group I work with, we've been doing this for many decades. I'll get into the management team at the end, but you'll see here copper. Copper, I think, is going to be one of the strongest performing metals over the next 5 to 10 years. For those of you that saw Brent Cook earlier this morning, interesting stat. We're going to have to mine in the next 26 years, mine what we've mined the entire human history of copper. So we're going to need to find more copper. The supply-demand gap, we know in the next 5 to 6 years, you're looking at a 5 million ton shortfall if we don't bring new capacity on. The demand side, we know it's growing. We all know Dr. Copper, synchronized global economic growth, that it's caused this increase in demand. But what's really interesting to us, I'm sure a lot of people here, are these new global macro trends, electric vehicles, clean energy. A lot of that has been talked about here, and that narrative continues to grow. And that's going to be where we see, I think, a lot of incremental new demand for the commodity going forward. It really is the common denominator in the electrification of the world right now. Then you look at things, we talked about India and some of these developing countries. If you look at GDP per capita and you look at, there's a number about $6,000, $7,000 per capita. When you hit that threshold, there's a boom in copper demand. And so we see some huge population centers like India that are going to be crossing that threshold here, parts of Africa as well over the coming decades. So we like the commodity. Now on the supply side, over 200 mines currently in operation that'll be shut down in the next, call it 20, 30 years. Lack of investment in exploration, development, and production capacity. Our group, our expertise really is on that exploration and discovery process. So we're out there now looking for those next deposits. And I'll say as a core strategy, what we're doing is we're going into historical districts, prolific districts like the Flin Flon mining district. We're going in there and acquiring projects that have had a fair bit of historical work, but not a lot of recent exploration. So we can go in there with a new look, some new techniques, new methods to find what was otherwise not found over the last, call it, couple of decades. So Flin Flon, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the area, a long, illustrious mining history there. Town of Flin Flon built on the mine. You'll see here 31 VMS deposits, over $25 billion of gross metal value that's been mined. What's interesting here, though, is you look at this, almost half or over half of the deposits that have been found have been advanced and have been mined. So this is one of these areas where when you actually find a deposit, you mine it. A lot of them go into production. There's typically less than 6 to 7 years from the discovery through the development. And then of particular note is the recent infrastructure that's been put in there. So in particular with our project, new power line that's about 15 kilometers away from the property, but $1.6 billion of infrastructure, mining infrastructure that's been invested in. A lot of you are familiar with the mining infrastructure in Flin Flon. It needs feed. We need to find new deposits in that area. There's been some recent notable developments. Hud Bay, for example, having made a recent discovery by the Lalor mine. You had Rockcliffe just announced, not to be confused with Rockridge, just announced a $30 million financing, a hub and spoke strategy. And quietly, Glencore's in the area. Glencore has a technical services agreement with a company just south of us called Foran. So that led us to this project, 85,000 hectare, big property package, northwest of Flin Flon, called the Knife Lake Project. And I'll get right into it. The historical work on the project, you'll see here a company called Leader Mining published a historical estimate back in 1998, 20 million tons of 0.6% copper, 0.1 gram per ton gold, 0.06% cobalt, and a zinc and silver credit. So a nice little deposit. It's at surface, near surface. It really hasn't seen much exploration or drilling any deeper than 100 meters. So there's a lot of potential at depth. But what's really intriguing about this is it's a topographic high, and this was found in the late 60s. No other deposits have been found in the vicinity, and I'll get into the history of this project and why that is. But very rarely do you ever see a one-off VMS deposit. In particular, this is a remobilized VMS. It's come from a primary source. So we're out there now looking for satellite deposits, and in particular, we're going to be looking for that primary source. Just to highlight, too, some of the drill results as an exploration company and upcoming catalyst, we start a drill program in the next several weeks. You'll see some pretty splashy numbers here, 1.4% copper over 60 meters, 5 grams per ton of silver as well, cobalt, zinc, and a bit of gold in that as well. So some very nice numbers and drill results, and all shallow. So this is what really drew us to the project in the first place, looking into the history. It has quite the history. It started in 1968 with the discovery. There was a big phase of exploration and drilling in the 60s and 70s. And then we fast forward to the mid-90s. A company, Leader Mining, drilled over 300 drill holes, and it was pretty much all focused shallow at this deposit. They came out with their geological reserves, non 43-101, and did some preliminary metallurgical work. And then we had 1999 to 2002. Metal prices collapsed, market tanked, and Leader Mining actually went under. And then there was a cease trade order on the company for the better part of the 2000s. Eventually, the project, which was essentially orphaned at that point, wound up in a company now called Minova Gold. Minova was very much focused on gold development in Manitoba. New management came in a few years ago, and this project, which actually was a mining lease, the deposit was a mining lease. First time this has ever happened in Saskatchewan, the lease lapsed prematurely. They simply did not file their paperwork. The lease lapsed, the ground opened up. A group that we do a lot of work with, and we have a technical services agreement to do the exploration here, Eagle Plains and Terralogic, staked this ground. Eagle Plains is a prospect generator, so their business model is simply to go out and farm these projects off. So we've acquired now 300 million pounds of copper in the number 3 mining jurisdiction, lots of exploration potential for less than half a penny per pound of copper. So what do we have coming up here? You'll see first drill program will be focused on going back into that deposit. You'll see here the blue image there. That shows the deposit. There's some gaps that we're looking to fill. It's also open along strike, and most importantly, open at depth as well. We're planning 1,000 meters here shortly, 8 to 10 drill holes. That will upgrade this to a 43-101 compliant resource, which will be a big milestone for the company in the coming months before summertime. But again, getting back to the depth potential, you'll see this diagram here in the bottom right. So that shows the deposit at the top, and what we think, and you can see it in the blue to the east side or to the right, there's a little orange blob there. That's about 250, 300 meters. There is mineralization at depth, but of the 400 drill holes, only a few of them have been drilled down there. So we're looking for what's potentially a new lens or an overturned fold limb. Now we go to the regional potential. As John said, it is at the current metal prices, it's really a call option right now on the metal prices. But regionally, we think there's a lot more to be found there. It's a big property package, and as I mentioned, it's a remobilized VMS system. So it's come from a source. It was remobilized from the emplacement of granitic rocks, and we think that we can go in there and hopefully find that source and find satellite deposits. One of the interesting techniques, one of the methods that we're going to be using is vectoring in on new targets using metal ratios, and that we think can lead us to additional discoveries. So getting back, when we talk about the history of the project and why more deposits, I get asked this, why have more deposits not been found again? It gets back to the history of this project. 2 major exploration programs in the 70s and 90s, no modern exploration since 2001, and all of that, most of that exploration was very much focused in at the deposit area. So it's ripe for new discoveries. You'll see here what we're planning to do, and this will be in a summer program following the drill program and the updated 43-101. We're going to go in there with a new look. We're going to use new geophysics, in particular deeper EM. There hasn't been any modern EM surveys carried out on this project. There were some historical ones that have regional conductors that are shallow, but we'll go in there with modern EM. We'll also go in there with a drone mag survey. There's a very unique and definitive mag signature on the deposit area. Groundwork as well, and then we'll follow up on new conductors that we find and go and hopefully find the source of that one-off deposit that we have there and look for satellite deposits. So that's the project. Just to quickly wrap up here, management and directors. I run the company, Jim Pettit and I out of Vancouver. I'm assembling a team around me to help me run the company. Rick Kazmersky, my head geologist, 40-year veteran, lives in Saskatoon, knows the province very well. We just announced in the last few weeks some notable additions to the board and advisory board. A lot of you are familiar with Ron Nedolitsky, a Canadian Mining Hall of Famer. He's credited with several discoveries that have gone into production. Joe Gallucci was led the mining investment banking team at 8 Capital. He's raised over $1 billion for Canadian companies, in particular with a focus on base metal companies. Hudbay was a big client of his. Simon Diakoski as well, corporate development. And last but not least, as a new company, very, very well structured. 23 million shares issued and outstanding, $1.5 million in the treasury, market cap $7.5 million, enterprise value of less than $6 million. So it's brand new, very tightly held. We have the right team to go and look for new VMS deposits, and we have the project that has an interesting history with a lot of upside potential. Thank you.